This is TWiT.
This episode of Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. Join an engaging IT learning community with ACI Learning and IT Pro. Hey, congratulations to Don Pizzette, IT Pro's co-founder and original edutainer, and the entire TechNado team for their 300th podcast. Good going, guys. Get your standard or premium IT Pro membership by using the code TWIT30 at checkout for 30% off. Check out go.acilearning.com/twit to learn more.
Now, you were from Elmira, New York. That's upstate New York, right? And in your book, you mentioned that you'd been interested in wanting to be an astronaut since you were a kid. I think you mentioned the Gemini program specifically at that time. But what's that path like? Because you do write about a very challenging time in your life growing up as a kid and a teenager in Elmira. I mean, there were issues with your father. Your family was flooded out with Hurricane Agnes in 72. What's that path like to become interested in flying as well as in a space program, which at the time it wasn't even possible for women to fly in space there?
Yeah, and there's a lot there to mention. I'll try to just hit the highlights. So my family was lower middle class, I'll say. And, my parents split up when I was 9 years old. My mother had to go to work. And I remember my mother saying this over and over again, I'm the only mother in your entire class that has to work. Back in those days, mothers pretty much stayed home. But I saw my mother really as a role model, and she was decisive. She worked hard. She raised us 4 kids. My dad was around on weekends, and there's a whole nother story there, but we had the period of time we were on welfare and food stamps, Medicaid, which is, I want to say healthcare for poor people. And I didn't have any money for flying lessons. And when I told my parents I wanted to fly, I was older. I was a teenager. Like, we don't have money for that. You want to go to college? We don't have money for that. So I had to go out and figure out how to do that myself. But I think it's in many ways that was good because I had to learn how to take initiative. The reason I was so passionate about doing this is I remember reading about those Gemini astronauts when I was in 4th grade, and I thought they were the coolest guys that ever existed. And I wanted to be just like them. I'm going to be a pilot, a test pilot, an engineer. I'm going to join the military. I'm going to fly jets. And this is what I'm thinking as a little kid. And I could see there were no women. But I just thought, well, I'm just going to be a lady pilot. I'm going to be a lady astronaut. And later on in high school, I realized that there were barriers. I mean, real legal barriers to women flying. And fortunately, that changed in 1978. When I started pilot training, I was in a test program. It actually changed in 1976 when the Air Force decided to start sending women through pilot training. And then I went in 1978. So I was right at the leading edge of women being able to fly. And the fact that we had a test program going on was a little bit of extra pressure, but I just wanted to fly. And I was so happy to have the opportunity to get in the cockpit of a military airplane and go out and do acrobatics and loops and rolls and come back and shoot patterns, touch and go landings. And I came back as an instructor. And my goal was get as many flying hours as possible so I can be a test pilot and an astronaut someday. So I think the timeline worked out good for me. So long answer to your question there, but good question.
But that path then, it sounds, if I'm getting it right, it's you wanted to fly the Air Force. There was a direct pipeline with ROTC and whatnot to get there, and then the rest is, I guess, in the skies. Is that kind of like a
that's right. Now you mentioned Elmira, New York, my hometown. It turns out, this probably had a factor in my decision. Elmira is the location of the National Soaring Museum, gliders. And Harris Hill has a glider port, and the gliders are towed off the hill over Chemung Valley. And as I was a kid growing up, I watched the gliders fly overhead. And my dad would take us to the glider field. We'd watch gliders take off. And so I think that really kind of set a little thing maybe in the back of my mind that flying is possible. I never did get a license when I was living there in Elmira in gliders, but I went and got a license in powered flight.